my students, welcome you back to the course on professionalism in interpretation and interpreting. And today we are going to explore the very first concept of translation revision. It is the work of a revisor in module number 10. So the questions for you to think of is, who are the revisors? What do they do? And it is to that a revisor's job is to achieve the best possible translation. I hope that by the end of the lesson you can firmly give me an understanding of the questions here, whether or not it is true or false. I hope that at the end of the lesson you can firmly give me your understanding of the revisor's job and say yes or no to this question. The other two questions for you to think of is, what does correcting mean and what is translation needs? Okay? And there will be up to 11 sections discussed in these modules. Now let's move on. Firstly, we have some of the discussion in order to answer the fourth mentioned question. Revising is that function of a professional translator in which he or she finds features of a draft translation that fall short of what is acceptable as determined by some concept of quality and make or recommend any needed correction and needed improvements. So the who here is a professional translator. The what is he or she finds the features from a draft translation that fall short of what is acceptable, and he or she also make and recommends any needed correction and needed improvements. So that is the job of a revisor. And the concept of quality may be derived from various sources, possibly different sources for different jobs. The translation or revision brief, professional standards, employer standards, the reviser's own concept of what is important in translation. So, the job of a revisor is not to achieve the best possible translation. It is eliminate wordings that fall short of whatever quality standard is relevant. A change may improve a translation in some abstract sense, but if it is not necessary to achieve the quality standard, then it is a bad revision. Correcting. What is correcting, right? Revisor fix significant omissions, major translation of wrong words, or major mistranslation, gross translation needs, nonsensical passages, terminology errors, and departures from the rules of the standard language. With other texts, revisers will also improve the translation, make the writing quality better, that is, engage in stylistic editing, eliminate minor translation needs, and make minor adjustments in meaning to better reflect the source text. And the last concept is translation needs or overly literal translation. The wordings are like a translation. They read as if the translator were trying to teach the reader the source language by stating in the target language the meaning of individual source language words with very little regards for the context, and imitating source language syntactic structures if that is possible. That is translation needs or overly literal translation. Translators sometimes stop attempting to figure out what the source text means for a variety of reasons. Maybe the text is poorly written or complicated, and the translator is tired at the end of the day, or the deadline is fast approaching. Then they start substituting bilingual dictionary equivalents of the source language words because it is the easiest and fastest ways to translate. So now let's move on to the 7 concepts that we are going to focus on this module. Firstly, it is the work of reviser. Drafting a translation is half a reading exercise and half a writing exercise, but revision is very different. Sometimes there will be little or no writing involved. A change may improve a translation in some abstract sense, but if it is not necessary to achieve the quality standard, then it is bad revision. The term revision will be used to include both self-revision and revision of others, unless the context makes clear that only one of these is intended. Having a suitable procedure and having the right mental attitude, the right answer to the question what I am doing. In order to have the right mental attitude, you are reading, not writing, and don't have your correcting pen poised or your fingers on the keyboard ready to make a change. Your aim is not to make changes, but to find problems, which is very different from the other one, right? And also, as a reader, you must try to read the text as future users, the reader in the future of the translation. In particular, be on the lookout for possible misreadings by those users. You should focus on the reading, not the writing. And revision here again covers both self-revision and other revision, except or unless when there are some indications that just one of the two is in use. Revision is a reading task. Okay. And under other two concepts, revision is mainly primary a reading task, an exercise in spotting passages that may not please the client or may check the text unfit for purpose. Spotting problems is not easy. It is a mistake to think that errors will simply jump out as you cast your eyes over the draft translation. Now we come to the second concept, revision terminology. We have to differentiate self-revision, quality control, tracking, and rereading. There is no generalized, recognized English terminology for revision activities. The term self-revision will be further discussed in Module 14 when you revise the work of yourself. In this module, the terms revision, quality control, tracking, and rereading are all used, but they are virtually synonymous. Rereading is most used here in the phrase comparative rereading and unilingual rereading, where the emphasis is on the distinction between revision that involves comparing every sentence of the translation to the corresponding bit of the source text, and revision in which the source text is consulted only when necessary to resolve a problem found in the translation. So, rereading in the two terms comparative rereading and unilingual rereading have been explained, right? And finally, why quality control and revision are synonyms, a distinction is made between quality controllers and revisers. Some translation services distinguish revision from quality control, with the latter being used for the business-oriented activities, which are discussed later in this chapter under the headings Quality Assessment and Quality Assurance. Finally, some people use proofreading for the activity here called revision. In literary translation, situations arise when the term revision should be used, but isn't. For the competencies of a reviser, I want you to spend time self-studying, watching some videos and take as many notes as you can. So this section will give us the question on which ability, knowledge, experience, and personal qualities, other than those required of a translator, are required of a reviser, are expected of a reviser, right? Ability to revise very vary. Ability to justify the need for changes and the related ability to avoid unneeded changes. Another is the ability to correct through small changes rather than retranslate, an ability to diagnose translation weaknesses and give advice on how to improve. So here are the competency expected of a reviser: detect problems, experience, knowledge of revision procedures, ability to make decisions promptly, ability to revise to varying degrees depending on the context, ability to justify the need for changes and to avoid unneeded changes, and again, ability to correct through small changes rather than retranslation. Other abilities can be the ability to appreciate others people's approaches, or to diagnose translation weaknesses, or some personal qualities like diplomacy, to deal with conflict, how to handle the conflicts in some workplace, because in some workplaces, revisers act as a buffers between the translators and other parties, such as the managers and the clients, or the leadership to organize a group of translators working on a project, and cautiousness to avoid making the translation worse, to worsen the translation rate, to keep in mind one's own limitations. Now, let's move to section 4, revision and specialization. As a reviser in a translation department or agency, you may find yourself wishing that the manager had declined to accept the job. Okay? If you do not feel qualified and you cannot find another reviser or a subject matter expert, you must signal to the client that the translation may well contain conceptual errors and need to be seen by a subject matter specialist for content and terminology before it is published. So, with specialized text, that is, text written by and for experts, and often concerned with the latest developments in some area of science or technology, revisers will need to decide whether they are qualified to revise the draft translation or not. If the translator is known to be or seen to be highly experienced in the field, then the reviser probably doesn't need to track few specific concepts and terms. However, if that is not the case, then unless the reviser has some independent knowledge of the field or considerable experience with specialized terms in that field, it is best to find another reviser who does have such experience, or discuss the translation with a subject matter expert. For the next sections, the revision function in translation services. Sometimes a few people at a translation agency or in the translation department of a government, corporation, or publisher are designated as revisers. They occupy official revisers' positions and direct all or much of their time to revising the work of the translator. Such designated revisor may also have training, administrative, and management responsibilities. They may be charged with training new translators, distributing tasks to other translators, and supervising junior translators. It may be a bad idea for people to spend all their time revising year after year because it is important to have a lively sense of the context in which revised translators are working, especially after new tools or policies are introduced. For the next, reliance on self-revision. A common issue today is the extent to which a translation service will rely on self-revision as opposed to revision by a second translator. Freelancers working directly for clients obviously need to pay special attention to self-revision because typically no other translator will see the text before delivery to the client. However, with the advent of discussions and job posting websites for translators, many freelancers have developed contacts with each other, which may include revising each other's work using email. And another context is that experienced translators are given instruction in revision techniques and then asked to be more methodical about checking and correcting their own work. However, an, a disadvantage of reliance on self-revision is overconfidence in one's ability to avoid error. Ideally, self-revisers allow time to pass between completion of the draft and self-revision so that the wording of the translation seems somewhat unfamiliar. Despite the problems of self-revision, it does not follow that other revision is always ideal. The need for other revision will be discussed in the following modules. The disadvantages of other revision are also discussed in module number 15. And for staff translators, things have been moving in the opposite direction. Some translating organizations have sought to save money by reducing the amount of time that highly paid senior translators spend revising the work of juniors. One way of doing this is to emphasize self-revision. Experienced translators again are given instruction in revision techniques and then asked to be more methodical about their checking and correcting their own work. Self-revision is then no longer a trick made before handing the text to a revisor. Rather than self-revising translator has final responsibility for the quality of the work. Indeed, in some translation services, such a translator is not allowed to ask peers to take a look at their drafts. Now I want to walk you through to the next section, reducing differences among revisers. A common problem in larger translation services is that each revisor has his or her own approach to revision. The UN Translation Service once conducted a study which found much greater than expected differences among revisers, and this problem arises in part because translator training usually do not include revision training. As the result, one revisor will make many stylistic changes, while another one will focus on copy editing changes, and one revisor will make changes in response to small nuances of meaning, while another will change only major mistranslation. The problem arises. So, one solution is a group revision session in which participants do two kinds of exercise. The next is crowdsourced revision. Just as Wikipedia allows anyone to edit its articles, so does it allow anyone to revise translations of articles. In English Wikipedia, there is a page entitled Wikipedia articles needing cleanup after translation. There are translations which a Wikipedia administrator has decided need improvements. The page contains links to articles that have been translated from over 60 source languages into English. In addition, volunteers who have translated Wikipedia articles can request the reason of their translation. Next one, revising translations into the reviser's second language. It is often said that revisers should be native speakers of the target language, but this may in fact not be necessary. It depends on which features of the translations are important. If revision is mainly for accuracy and completeness, it doesn't matter which language is the reviser's native language. However, if writing quality is important and the translation is to be published, then the reviser should be a native or near native writer of the target language. Even native writers of the target language can be susceptible to this if they have lived abroad for many years. Now we come to quality checking by clients. Often, clients treat translation as a professional service and therefore rely on the translation provider to ensure quality. However, clients may also subject the translations they receive to some kind of quality check using their own criteria. In addition, they may put the completed translation through an editing process. For example, if the client will be publishing the translation of a scientific work, there will ideally be a scientific editor to check the content and terminology. It is a good idea to determine whether a subject matter editor will be looking at the text you are revising. And one form of quality checking sometimes used by clients is back translation. The client has someone translate your revised translation back into the source language. Back translation may have its place in the process of testing questionnaires that are to be answered in several languages, but otherwise is a dubious method, even for checking accuracy, let alone other aspects of translation. For one thing, the back translator may well make a mistake, and then any discrepancy between the original source text and the back translation will be the back translator's fault. If you hear from a subject matter expert before you complete your revision work, and there is a conflict between the wording they want to see and the wording you believe reflects the source text, then you must keep to the wording you believe to be correct, especially if you are certifying a translation under your country legislation. The translator shall refuse to give to a text an interpretation of which he or she doesn't improve. Since the final translation belongs to the client, they are of course free to change what you have written. And the next one is the brief. The work of both translators and revisers is ideally governed by a brief from the client. It may not even be clear who is asking for the translation, If the request for translation comes from a form mentioning that the client is a hearing board, or if the form mentions an upcoming hearing date, it can probably be assumed that the translation will be used to make a decision. A written request is received for a verbatim translation of a sworn statement related to an immigration matter. So, one solution might be to prepare a translation which is as close as possible to the lexical, grammatical structure of the source text while still being readable. It turns out that verbatim means a complete as opposed to a summary translation. In Vietnamese, we have nguyên văn verbatim. Okay. The next one is balancing the interests of the authors, clients, readers, and translator. This one is another issue, but you have to consider when you want to be a reviser. Supposing you are revising a draft translation that is not close to the source one, and you realize that the translation will be communicatively successful, but you also know that the source author will see the translation and will probably not be satisfied or pleased. But if the author is a client, then you have a real conflict. If you cannot persuade the author that a close translation is undesirable, then you may have to either decline to do any more work on the job or revise the translation back to a close one. The revised translation must then convey the clearly intended meaning, though a note might be sent to the client signaling the presence in the source text of such problems. If any of them are reading a translation of the applicant's writing, they will be forming an opinion about the writing ability of the translator rather than of the applicant. So, the various parts of brief may be obtained in three ways. They are explicit. The client states them orally in written forms when the request for translation is made, or they are unstated but already known from previous similar jobs from the same client, or they are elicited by the translation service, which takes the initiative of requiring about this or that aspect of the brief. And the above story is a scenario where a draft translation seems to be successful from the reader's point of view, but not a success from the client's. Another case, the same scenario is like this. A request has been received from the head of the company's building maintenance department to translate a new edition of a repair manual, and you observe that the translator hasn't used the new terms which has just been decreed by a term standardization body or agency. The translator tells you that the technicians who will be the sole readers are not so familiar with the new terms, so she has either old, no longer approved terms with which they are familiar. However, the organization for which both you and the head of maintenance department work had decided to introduce the new terminology, and the Translators Association to which you belong supports the goal of having translators have disseminated new official terminologies. So, in order to meet the standards of the client and your professional association, you must use terms which the reader will not understand. What will you do? The solution in this particular case might be to prepare a temporary pull-out glossary to be removed a year later once the new terms have been learn it. And the glossary would list the familiar terms in alphabetical order with the new standard terms in a column opposite. That way, the needs of all parties can be met. And now, I want to talk about how to evaluate revisers. To answer these questions, a translation service may find it useful to conduct audits. To conduct a simple audit, collect a small sample of revised translation delivered to clients over the past few months and count the number of errors that were not caught in a trunk of convenient sites, perhaps 500 words for each text, or count only serious errors. Though this will take more time because you have to keep stopping to consider whether an error is serious. Okay, and to find out the extent to which the quality of the translation is due to the reviser rather than the translator, you will need to arrange to have draft translation saved so that they can be compared to revised versions. You can focus either on good revision work or bad work, or consider both. For good work, calculate the percentage of the errors in a 500-word chunk of the draft translation that were properly corrected during revision. If you fall more ambitious, you can distinguish types of error. So count the number of errors introduced by the reviser in a chunk of given length plus the number of errors not noticed, and a more complete audit would consider not just errors introduced or not noticed, but also unnecessary changes and inadequately corrected errors. The next one is the problem of time and quality. A central issue for all translators, and in particular for reviser, is the trade-off between time and quality. From the economic viewpoint, time is money, and the faster a translation is completed, the better. However, the problem is most easily seen in situations where clients are billed. Billing may be in textual units or in time units. If a job takes 15 hours, someone will be worse off economically rather than if it takes only 12 hours. If the client is being billed in hours, the bill will be 25% higher, and the client may look elsewhere next time. If the bill is so much per word or per page, the freelance translator would have less total income over a given period of time. Suppose translator and reviser together take 15 hours to complete a 3,000 word job. They are then working at 200 words an hour, whereas if they take 12 hours, they are working at 250 words an hour. And if the client is paying 15 cents a word, then the first pair are bringing in $30 an hour, and the second $37.5 an hour. But the text completed in 12 hours is as good as the text completed in 15 hours. Does it serve its purpose properly? Are there more undiscovered errors in it? Possibly serious ones. There's no getting around the fact that quality takes time. Achieving accuracy in particular is time consuming for both the first translator and the revising translator. And there is a temptation under these circumstances to define quality in terms of client complaints. A translation is of adequate quality if the client doesn't complain about it. The quantity of revision, how much, right? The word is quantity of revision in section 15 in this module. With most of the European languages, a translator with at least 5 years of full-time experience working with a mix of familiar and unfamiliar, poorly written and well-written text should be able to complete 1,600 to 2,000 words of source text in an 8-hour day, or between 200 and 250 words an hour. And it should be possible for an experienced reviser to do comparative rereading and correction of such a mix of text at 3 times the translation speed, and unilingual rereading and correction at 5 times the translation speed, assuming a mix of abilities among the translators revised. Okay, a lot of numbers, right? So, using the above figures, a comparative rereading of 1,000 words will take somewhere between 1 hour 20 minutes and 1 hour 40 minutes, or a third to 2/3 more time than unilingual rereading at 1,000 words an hour. And someone who spends much of the day revising translation in a single field with well-written source text and very good translator will get a lot more done per hour than someone who has to spend much less time revising and often who has to work with less than excellent translators, poorly written source text, and materials in many or in over various types of fields, some of them unfamiliar. The next, second to last here, is quality assessment. Unlike quality control, which always occurs before the translation is delivered to the client, quality assessment is after the delivery. It often takes place after delivery, so it is not part of the translation production process. And whereas quality control is text-oriented and client or reader-oriented, then quality assessment is business-oriented. The results of quality assessment will also tell an organization whether its quality control system is working or not. If the assessment reveals less than the desired quality, then something is wrong, either with the quality control procedures themselves or with their implementation. Okay? So, what else about assessments of translation? You see that some of the problems of quality assessment can be discussed in the appendix number 2. And normally assessment consists in identifying problems in one or more randomly selected passages of the text in order to determine the degree to which it meets professional standards and the standards of the translator provider. And the last section here is quality assurance, also known as quality management. It is a full set of procedures applied not just after, as with quality assessment, but also before and during the translation production process by all members of a translating agency to ensure that quality objectives important to clients are met. The idea is that if certain procedures are followed before and during the production of a translation, that will increase the likelihood of good quality. For example, the ASTM published a standard guide for quality assurance in translation in 2006. It identifies factors relevant to the quality of language translation services for each phase of a certain translation project. In 2015, the CEN standards were superseded by ISO 17100 from the International Organization for Standardization, and it differs from the European standard in some interesting ways, most notably in not requiring revision of every text by a second translator. Instead, the standard says the translation service provider shall identify the needs for the revision, taking into account the abilities of the translator, requirements of the client, and the nature of the assignment. Okay, so that is also the end of this module, the work of revisor. Thank you and goodbye.